No matter what Sarah seemed to think, I couldn't defeat Damon with magic. Not yet, anyway. Maybe she meant for me to wait until my training had begun, but I had the sense that, magic or not, it was going to be easier to escape on the road than it would be from the Acadam. That meant I needed information, and fast. I didn't know how much time I had until we would be there. Dawn broke as we walked, and I watched Damon out of the corner of my eye, trying to find any amulets or magic wands I might steal to rob him of his powers. He didn't seem to have any, and staring at the movement of his muscles under his clothes was doing more harm than good to my powers of concentration. So I watched everything else, instead, and I noticed a strange thing. From the way landmarks seemed to grow closer far too quickly, and we never encountered a road, much less a town. I had the unsettling feeling that Damon was taking us through some not quite real world where the earth folded beneath our feet to bring us farther. Faster. Once I realized that, I began to notice things flickering in the corners of my vision. Glimpses of roofs over the tops of the trees, roads half glimpsed in the greenery, the sound of voices mixed among the trill of the birds. And once, the gleaming bulk of an office building. My mind seemed not to want to know about this other world, just like it didn't want to know about my missing memory. And so I had to cling to each flicker in reality with sheer stubbornness. I forced myself to picture the things I had seen, no matter how much my mind tried to slide away from those thoughts. It seemed to work. Once, I stumbled over a cracked paving stone. Another time, I saw my reflection in a shop window that was immediately gone. I wondered, suddenly unsettled, if anyone in the real world saw me flicker into existence, and then back out of it. Then again, perhaps their minds were just as uninclined to acknowledge that as mine was. Damon was polite to me, and so I was polite to him. Barely. I figured that the success of my escape attempt rested largely on lulling him into a false sense of security, which meant not being too smug about my impending flight, but also not too polite and sweet. Damon knew I didn't like being here. He just had to think that I also wasn't going to try to escape. It was hard to tell if he was worried about that or not. Perhaps he figured that between his warnings and his alternate universe, I was pretty well trapped. I dedicated the day to seeing if I could make the flickers appear on my own. Quickly looking toward my peripheral vision didn't seem to work, nor did walking with my eyes half closed. And I nearly got brained by a tree branch trying that. I noticed that the forest right around us seemed to be the fairyland, and the trees a few meters out seemed more normal. Staring at those patches of forest didn't seem to give me any more success, but it did give me an idea. I began to lag behind Damon, first a few steps, and then a few more. Sometimes I caught up with him. Sometimes I would call out to him that I was stopping. I let myself wander a little bit off to the side as well. I always kept myself in sight, meeting his gaze openly when he looked over to check if I was still there. I forced myself to take my time, but it cost what little patience I had. Every step was taking me closer to the prison. But it worked. The further I got, the more flickers I saw. I returned to Damon's side, having to bite my lips to keep from smiling broadly. The first chance I got, I would run. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked me cautiously. I blinked. I wasn't quite sure how to answer that question. Yes, aside from the kidnapping thing seemed both the only honest way to answer, and also a bit too rude. "I'm tired," I said finally, "and hungry. We'll stop for the day soon." He studied the sky. The sun was creeping lower, however slowly, but we had been walking for a long time. "Do you think you can go a little further?" I tried not let my leap of joy show on my face. Stopping for the day meant we wouldn't be arriving tonight. I shrugged to show my acquiescence. Not rude, quite, but a reminder that I wasn't keen on following him. For a moment, I thought he would say something else. He was staring at me with a troubled expression, and I could see the way he wanted to say something more. An admonishment. Reassurance. Whatever it was, he only closed his mouth on the words and set off again. Was my worry getting under his skin, or was he just angry that the captured monarchist wasn't falling all over herself to convert? It was hard to know. He made another camp for us about an hour later, and this time I got to see it grow. From the pretty, storybook forest he already seemed to summon effortlessly, to beds of moss curled their way into being. I knelt down to watch them grow, fascinated. I had never paid much attention to moss. The soft cushion I had slept on was really hundreds upon hundreds of tiny capsules with wispy tops, each capsule swelling and turning a bright green. I found myself smiling as I watched it grow, and when I put out my fingers to brush over it lightly, snowbells sprang up where my fingers passed, gorgeous under the dappled shadows. I laughed delightedly, and then looked up to see Damon smiling down at me. "Snowbells," I told him. "I saw how you like them," he explained. "They like growing here." My own smile died. He had made those snowbells to make me smile, and I didn't like it. No amount of pretty flowers was going to make me a willing slave. I looked away sharply and sat down on the cushion, rubbing at my shoulders and pulling my boots off. I wasn't going to be charmed by him or his magic. I wasn't going to let him build a connection between us. He was trying to do the same thing to me that I was trying to do to him, lull me into a false sense of security. I wasn't going to fall for it. I'll go get us some dinner. What his face looked like, I wasn't sure. I was damned if I was going to look at him. But his voice was subdued. He didn't make a cage, but I knew he was watching me. I drew my knees up to my chest, rested my chin on them, and tried to keep from wiggling my toes in the moss. It was exceedingly soft, but I couldn't let my guard down. We ate in silence when he returned. He made a fire from scratch. Apparently fire wasn't a phenomenon he could summon from nothing. And cleaned the rabbits he'd caught. There wasn't so much as a mark on the bodies before he used his knife to gut them. And I wondered just how he'd managed it. He caught me looking. Druids don't hunt quite the way other people do, he said quietly. What, you transform into a panther and scare them to death? The idea seemed to amuse and annoy him in equal measure. No, we ate in silence, and I settled down on the moss even though the light was still fading. I didn't want him to talk. I didn't want him to try to explain any of this to me, and I didn't want to catch myself enjoying the world he'd built up around us. I just wanted him to go to sleep so I could escape. It took forever for night to fall and Damon to fall asleep. For a long time he sat and stared into the fire. He didn't fidget or look bored. He seemed to be accustomed to being alone. I wondered what he was thinking about and told myself it wasn't important. Once he caught me looking at him and I looked away, trying not to blush. I was watching him because he was my enemy, not because, well, not for any other reasons. He did, eventually, go to sleep. He lay down and I listened to his breathing go slow and even, which was when I realized I needed to kill him. My eyes flew open in the darkness and I felt a jolt of adrenaline course through me. Why the hell had I not realized this before? If I just ran, and he really did have a magical tracker on me, my attempt was doomed from the start. I should kill him. It was the reasonable thing to do. After all, he was a killer. I knew that. He was a killer, and he was bringing me to a prison, and while I might not have my magic. You didn't need magic to kill someone. Non-magical humans had been proving that one for years. I forced myself to sit up quietly. I was actually shaking, which I hated. I rubbed at my temples and tried to think. How did you kill someone? I didn't have a knife. He did, but it was in his boot, and I didn't think I knew how to pick pockets. I didn't have a gun. A rock? I remembered a tumble of them under the edge of a nearby boulder and eased myself up. My feet seemed to be carrying me all on their own, which was good, because I was really not sure I could do this. Hopefully my hands would also cooperate. I felt around in the dark and slowly withdrew a rock that seemed hefty. It had some sharp edges, too, which was good, right? I edged back into the camp and took the time to study Damon's chest. It was still rising and falling slowly. He was a killer, I told myself. He was a hunter, and a very good one, apparently. Sarah, who had never met him before, had known him on sight. She'd told me that we were never going to outrun him. Therefore, it stood to reason that I could not outrun him on my own, and from there, that I had to kill him unless I wanted to be captured again. But no matter how many times I walked myself through that logic, I didn't actually want to do it. How long I stood there, frozen, I wasn't sure. But then he shifted and turned onto his side and the moonlight caught on the pulse at his throat. The rock dropped out of my hands to land with a soft thunk on the moss. This was too much. I couldn't do it. I caught my breath, desperate not to make a sound, willing him not to wake up and see me next to the murder weapon. Pick it back up and kill him, I told myself. But I couldn't do it. I backed away, hard in my throat, and then I turned and ran.